stages. Dave Goddard and Steve English here at trackside for the Sunday morning warm-up session. Steve, plenty of talking points right across the grid this weekend.
Yeah, certainly when you look at the big talking points, it's always going to be about Bulaga and Toprak for the win in the World Championship this season. But we had a great scrap yesterday for the final step of the podium, and it really sets up nicely for the Super Pole race in a couple of hours' time. I think one of the big things for the teams and the riders right now is just looking at the track temperature, looking at what tyres they'll need to use in the Super Pole race. We've got 22 degrees track temperature this morning. Realistically, most teams needed over 30 degrees to be able to use the softer qualifying tyre in the Super Pole race. That's one of the things that they'll be considering right now at this stage. What do you do if you have to use that harder tyre?
Yes, indeed. A very different tyre allocation from Pirelli here this weekend to the previous round we saw in Motorland Aragon. They had a much harder set of compounds available. Softer tyres here at Estoril. The temperature is rising all the time. Track temperature, as we say, of just over 22 degrees at the moment. That is going to rise very rapidly, and the other thing to consider here, being on the Atlantic coast here on the Portuguese Riviera, is the wind strength and speed as well. It has been very blustery at the start of the weekend, a little calmer yesterday, but there's still a good following wind down the long pit straight here at the Estoril circuit. As Toprak Razgatlioglu raced to victory in yesterday's race, finishing just under 2 seconds clear of Nicolo Bulaga. But in the early stages especially, he certainly didn't have things all his own way.
Yeah, for Toprak, what we were able to see in yesterday's race was those early laps. He opened up a couple of seconds of an advantage. In the mid-phase of the race, Bulaga came back at him, and ultimately Bulaga struggled with front grip. Toprak struggled a little bit with rear grip, and they ended up at the same pace as each other at the end, and Toprak was able to take that race victory.
Indeed, grip was the key word yesterday for all of the front runners, with Bulaga eventually losing out with some 3 laps to go. He made a mistake coming out of the Parabolica and got onto the curves, which dropped him back, and Toprak able to pull away for, as we say, his 20th win of the season, getting back to winning ways after those 2 defeats to Bulaga in the last round at Motorland Aragon. But a little slower off the start for Toprak yesterday, and it was Alvaro Bautista who led the first lap. His first lap led in certainly a very long time, having started from the front row for the first time in over a year.
Yeah, first time he's led since Assen at the beginning of the season at round 3. So for him, it is one of those situations where trying to find that bit of form, but a lot of it comes from being able to qualify well in the Super Pole race. Those early laps in both stages of yesterday's race, before the red flag and after the red flag, he was able to be a lot more combative and a little bit more aggressive than we've seen in opening laps over the last couple of years from him. But ultimately, he struggled in that first half of the race, and that's where, once again, the big difficulty for Bautista is.
Nicolo Bulaga, meanwhile, looking a lot more relaxed, a bit more motivated this weekend than we saw. He was clearly frustrated in the early part of the weekend at Aragon until he got those 2 breakthrough victories, ending the long 13-race winning run of Toprak in the Super Pole race there, and then in race 2 as well. Any frustration certainly not returning so far this weekend. He's more focused. They both riders have said they're not thinking of the championship, they're just focusing on each race as it comes, and Toprak trying to do the hat-trick here this weekend is his main focus. Alvaro Bautista, meanwhile, great to see him back on front-running form after a slightly lean spell over the middle of the season. As we say, on the front row for the first time in over a year in Super Pole yesterday, and then leading the first lap of the race for the first time since that Dutch round. Meanwhile, behind them, we had a red flag on the first lap, as Steve has already mentioned, when Axel Bassani lost the front of his Bimota on the first corner, and there was a bit of a pile-up as a result, but everyone was eventually able to race on. Andrea Locatelli heads out of his pit box to get underway with this 10-minute warm-up session, and he's now back in, as is Bautista, for the battle for bronze, the 3rd place in the championship, with Danilo Petrucci absent this weekend with that hand injury.
Yeah, and it's a strange weekend whenever you lose Petrucci. Sam Lowe's out as well. We didn't see Rinaldi racing yesterday. He's going to take part in the warm-up this morning. He's suffered pretty bad gastroenteritis and had to sit out yesterday's action. Did well to qualify yesterday, and then he should be okay for today.
Jonathan Ray, meanwhile, was back on top form on the circuit where he claimed that 6th title in 2020. He was pursuing Bautista over the first half of yesterday's race, but as we say, a slightly depleted field here this weekend. Danilo Petrucci suffering a broken bone in his right hand in a bizarre accident while training in the gym a few days ago. And we also lost Sam Lowe's, who rode well in free practice on Friday and on Saturday morning, but then pulled out with a reoccurrence of an old rib injury, unfortunately, the Mark VDS man, so he's absent this weekend, but we are hoping to see Michael Ruben Rinaldi back on the Moto X racing machine. He is out there. You've seen him at the top of the picture there. So the battle for third place in the championship is very much back on, with Bautista and Locatelli trying to catch up to our third place man in the points, Danilo Petrucci, the top independent rider this year. Axel Bassani, meanwhile, we mentioned on the Vimoto, been showing some good pace over the early part of this weekend, and he was very frustrated to get caught up with that pile-up on the first corner of race 1 yesterday. Yeah,
and the big instant into turn 1 was one of those tricky ones that can happen around Estoril. This is a place where everyone's trying to make up those places right from the start, and ultimately for some of the riders that were caught out in it, and you can see for Rinaldi there, just taking it easy. We'll see if he just comes straight back into the pits, or if he stays out to do a couple of laps now as well, just to get himself up to speed.
He'll have been dosed up and ready after his illness yesterday. One man who showed some good pace early on in Superpole is Garrett Gerloff on the Kawasaki. Always likes his visits to Estoril. It's over the line, of course. Time's not important in this just 10-minute warm-up session. They're all getting ready, getting the bikes set up for the Superpole session later on. Yeah, for Gerloff as the lone Kawasaki, it's always a bit of a struggle, and throughout the course of this season we've seen it where that one-lap pace hasn't quite been there. If you look at it, a couple of rounds in Most and also in Donington he qualified well, but here yesterday able to come away with a top 10 finish and score decent points, and ultimately for Gerloff and for the Pacetti Kawasaki team, that's what the target has to be. Mentioning impressive pace yesterday, and also a top 10 for Xavi Vierge on the Honda P7 after starting an impressive P5 from Superpole. So good to see the Honda in good form. Of course, Xavi Vierge will be moving to Yamaha next season, with big boots to fill, with Jonathan Ray announcing his retirement. See Ray chasing Toprak Razgatlioglu here, and when we were speaking to Yamaha earlier in the weekend, the pressure off Ray slightly now that he's made the announcement of his retirement. He's certainly improved his pace this weekend. I think that what we've seen over the last few rounds are tracks that suit Ray's style, and he's been able to qualify well. Ultimately, if you qualify well, you give yourself those opportunities to be a little bit further up the field. Ray's qualified inside the top 10 3 of the last 4 Superpole sessions, and it gives you that little bit, 4 of the last 5, and it means that it gives you that good opportunity to be able to land some blows at the start of the races. I think that the one thing for Ray is you can still see that he's aggressive on the bike, he's tense to try and get those good results, and it's inevitable because he's still chasing that high as he comes towards the end of his World SBK career. But the Superpole race is an opportunity for Ray to be back on the podium. Certainly is going to be a big party in Jerez next weekend as Jonathan Ray celebrates the final round of his regular racing career in World Superbikes. Alvaro Bautista is the man he was battling with in race 1 yesterday. They were fighting for the final podium spot at one stage until Ray dropped back down into P6 behind Locatelli, his teammate, and Alex Lowe's on the motor, coming through after a slightly slower start in race 1 yesterday. Bautista currently the quickest on times in this warm-up session. Nicolo Bulliger has yet to set a flying lap. He's coming round now, just getting the feel for the circuit in these slightly cooler temperatures. The track temperature has actually cooled down very slightly since the start of this session. It will certainly warm up later on for the Superpole race. That's coming up at 11 a.m. Other riders to watch out there include the two Bimotors. Other news stories breaking this week, of course. So we've heard since the last round that Miguel Oliveira will be joining the BMW squad for next season as teammate to Danilo Petrucci. Honda, it's all changed as well. Jake Dixon and Somkat Chantra joining in place of Ike Lecuona and Xavi Vierge. And also the news this weekend that Ryan Vickers will not be continuing with the Moto Corsa Ducati team. So the grid's certainly taking shape very rapidly for next season. Yeah, it is shaping up at this stage, and it's nice to be able to see that confirmation for Honda and for BMW as well with Oliveira. Good to be able to see riders like that coming into the championship. I think that for Miguel in particular, he had never really shown much ambition to come to World Superbikes, wanted to stay in MotoGP, and then over the course of the summer he's able to see that there is the opportunity to come here, be on a factory bike and still be able to go racing. And it's an important one for a rider like him moving into the next phase of his career, that at the end of November when he jumps onto that BMW for the first time, that he's going to be able to find the feeling that he needs to have with it and build up towards Phillip Island.
good thing is starting the season in Phillip Island is probably a good thing for someone like Oliveira, someone like Dixon as well, and even Chantra on the Honda, because I think Chantra's going to surprise a few people with some of his results next year compared to what the expectation is. And obviously after such a disappointing year in MotoGP, expectations are very low. But I think he'll have some good weekends. Dixon will be the team leader for them. But I think it's good to be able to see some Grand Prix riders coming across.
Yes, indeed, and with expectations a little less, shall we say, coming in, it'll mean less pressure going into the opening rounds of next season. It's really going to be very unpredictable indeed in 2026. So many huge sea changes in the championship, with Toprak Razgatlioglu moving in the opposite direction to MotoGP. No Jonathan Ray. Of course, Alvaro Bautista moving away from the factory Ducati squad onto the Barney machine in place of Petrucci.
Yeah, ultimately the big thing's going to be who's going to step up to take the fight to Bulaga. And we know that Bulaga's going to have the pressure on his shoulders to win that championship, but we have to wait and see with the new Ducati if anyone's able to make that big step that they have to find. Someone like Iker Lecuona is going to be the interesting one, because he'll move from the Honda to the Aruba Ducati squad. And the expectation is that he needs to be able to win races. He needs to be able to show something all the way through the season.
Yeah, it's good to see Iker Lecuona back out on the Honda this weekend, returning from those arm injuries sustained at Balaton Park in Hungary a couple of rounds ago. Missed France and Aragon. It's back here this weekend. And also another rider we're missing this weekend, unfortunately, is Dominic Egerter for the GRT Yamaha squad. Again, they're suffering a hand injury in a training accident in the run to this event. So Remy Gardner running alone. It certainly is a slightly depleted field here this weekend. Thankfully not depleted too much further by that pilot we had at the start of race 1 yesterday. It was Michael van der Mark who took the brunt of that one, had to change his bike going into the restart after the red flag. Axel Bassani caught up as well as Bahatin Sofoglu was also involved. He was late out, had to start from the back on the restarts. Certainly all happening here at Estoril yesterday. 2 minutes to go then in this Sunday morning warm-up session. The quickest at the moment it is Toprak Razgatlioglu, as you see Iker Lecuona looking to improve. Gary Montella out there as well, the only Barney Ducati out there this weekend with the withdrawal of Danilo Petrucci. Razgatlioglu ahead of the two Ducatis at the moment, Jonathan Ray and Alex Lowe's next in the times. So Bassani improves into 4th place. I think he'll be channeling his frustrations from yesterday into putting in some strong performances here today, Bassani, on the second of the Mimosas.
Ultimately for Bassani, the big challenge is going to be to try and perform a little bit better than yesterday. Obviously qualified on the 3rd row of the grid, needs to come away with top 10 finishes. Yesterday we were able to see from him, he finished in 11th, but he was lucky because he was the one that had that crash at turn 1 that kind of triggered everything else, and the red flag let him have the opportunity to get back and get out there again and be able to score some points. So he needs to make sure that he's able to come away with something.
Michael van der Mark back on the second of the BMWs after his spill at the start of race 1 yesterday. He managed to take the restart and got into the points, but a disappointing year for Mikey as he gets ready to move away from the Superbike paddock.
Yeah, speaking to BMW last night, they said that Mikey went out and the transponder failed, so the bike didn't know where it was out on the track, and obviously the electronics, they're very dependent on knowing where you are, and he really struggled with that as a result. So tough race 1 for him, but he'll have the opportunity in the Superpole race and race 2 to try and make amends.
Nicolo Bulaga puts in his quickest lap of this session. The checkered flag will be out in just a few seconds. Bulaga goes second to Razgatlioglu, which has become a familiar pattern here this weekend. Second to him in race 1 yesterday. The title can be won this weekend, but chances, I would say, fairly remote. I think we're going all the way to Jerez.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to if Bulaga has a problem. And if Bulaga has a problem, championship in all likelihood we won today. If not, we're going to Jerez and the final round of the year next weekend.
So coming to the end of this warm-up session then, the checkered flag is now out. Just let's see if anybody is going to put in a quick lap at the end of the session. Andrea Locatelli looking to improve. He does to P8 in the time. But times not really relevant in this session. It's all about shaking down the machine, getting the setup correct for the Superpole race a little later on. The temperatures will have risen a little. The decision will now be what tyres to use, as we said at the beginning of the session, for that short Superpole race to set the grid for race 2 coming up later this afternoon. Toprak Razgatlioglu will be at top of the session once again, although Bulliger has not yet taken the checkered flag. I don't think we'll see him come through and improve here. Toprak has backed off. Jonathan Ray coming in to be one of the last riders to complete a flying lap here in this morning session at Estoril. Goes through turns 9 and 10 at the top of the circuit. More twisty section of this Estoril circuit, which is a largely flowing layout in its early laps, and then you've got the turns 9 and 10 at the top, and then this very long parabolica section, famous for Nicolo Bulliger's move on Toprak Razgatlioglu last year to produce the closest ever finish in World Superbikes in our Superpole race last year, winning by just 0.003 of a second on the line ahead of Toprak. Jonathan Ray crosses the line. I think that's everybody in now at the end of this session, so it will be Razgatlioglu at the top of the times ahead of Bulliger and Bautista. Yeah,
Bulliger improved his time right at the end of the session, but still 0.4 of a second off Toprak in this session. And certainly when we get into the Superpole race, it's going to come down to that tyre choice. And last year, Bulliger used the softer tyre, Toprak used the harder tyre, and that was a big deciding factor in how the race was won. But for Bulliger, you'd imagine he'll go out on that tyre. Bautista's out on it right now, but track temperature a little bit low, so everyone not really able to get that good indication of it just yet.
Last couple of practice starts then before the riders head back into the pits, and the discussions will begin with their crew chiefs as to what they're going to decide for a couple of hours' time, bringing the classification very shortly on our morning session. With discussions going on there in the practice start area.
Yeah, yesterday Toprak wasn't too impressed with Jonathan Ray's teammate Andrea Locatelli and how forceful Locca was at one stage during the race. And it was interesting to see that, because we don't tend to see Toprak get frustrated about things like that. But yesterday he was pretty clear about it. So we'll see how that plays out during the course of the Superpole race in particular.
It certainly will, yes. An interesting day coming up here in Estoril. It is second match point effectively on the championship. We saw Toprak do what he needed to do yesterday, but Nicolo Bulliger did what he needed as well, taking that second place, and it was closing in the middle portion of that race yesterday, only to slip back with 3 laps to go. So that concludes our morning warm-up session here on this Sunday morning here at the ECMA Estoril round. Toprak Razgatlioglu quickest with a 1:35.033 ahead of the 2 Ducatis. Alex Lowe's top of the Motors first. Yamaha Jonathan Ray in 7th place. See Michael Ruben Rinaldi back out after his illness yesterday as well, completing session in P18. Six laps completed by Toprak. Around 0.8 of a second off his lap record pace from the Superpole session yesterday.